Someone I want to see.
My friend Sherlock Holmes.
221B Baker Street.
Hello there. Welcome to my review of The Return of Sherlock Holmes, Series 2, Episode 1, The Devil's Foot. The prologue to this episode sees a Cornish coastal house filled with African artefacts, broken into, and a glass jar is emptied of some powder. We then join Holmes and Watson not in Baker Street, but on the very same coast, with Holmes once again convalescing as he did in the Musgrave ritual, and, like in that episode, he is once again using cocaine, much to Watson's discomfort. The parish vicar arrives to see Holmes at the house they're staying at, and Holmes carries out his usual deductive party trick.
Do come in, Mr. Rounding.
Very stupid of me. How did you know my name?
You have an interest in archaeology, do you not? You're a left-handed gardener. You're a student of archaeology. You've published a paper on the theories surrounding Neolithic burial rites.
Although this time it is a trick, as he read all about the vicar in the parish magazine.
Precise in every detail, but how, sir, how?
Vicar. The parish magazine, it's all...
It's a refreshing twist on his usual deductive powers, although shouldn't be that surprising as he thrives on data, and this is no different to collecting data by more elaborate means. The vicar, Reverend Roundhay, invites them both to dine with him and his lodger, Mr. Tregennis. While walking on the moors, Holmes and Watson see Dr. Leon Sterndale, who is incredibly surly towards them, and as we hear Watson's narration tell us how Sherlock would walk alone, we then see him doing so on the beach, pouring away his final 7% solution of cocaine and burying his syringe. This is a much more solemn beginning to an episode than we have seen before, as there is not yet a mystery to speak of, nor a client with a predicament. It's about Sherlock abandoning his drug habit and leaving it behind him, which was less of a dramatic device and more about how younger audiences were enjoying the series, and it was felt it was impossible to contextualise Holmes' drug use for this younger audience. It's not all about his chemical dependency though, as a client arrives in the form of Reverend Roundhay and his previously mentioned lodger, Mortimer Tregennis. Mortimer spent the previous evening playing cards with his two brothers and sister before leaving for his rooms with Reverend Roundhay, but when he returned to their home the next morning, he discovered the sister dead and the two brothers left out of their senses. Tregennis is unable to come up with an explanation, but says that while his back was to the window when they were playing cards, his brother and whist partner sat opposite, who seemed to see something out of the window, but when Tregennis turned round he could see nothing. That was the only odd occurrence while he was there. The doctor, who treated the family the next morning, was briefly overcome with faintness as well while in the room. Tregennis takes Holmes and Watson to the house, and Holmes investigates, now full of life, with renewed vigour from this puzzling case. He speaks with the housekeeper, who was unaffected, and she confirms the parts of the story she was present for. Holmes is unable to work out exactly what happened, but he knows Tregennis is lying about some of the details he provided. As he and Watson reason out the case, he is approached by Dr. Sterndale.
Have you made any progress? Tell me what you know about the fate of the Tregennis family.
Who is equally as surly as he first was, but explains he has returned from Plymouth to find out what has happened to the Tregennis family, as they were distant cousins.
So their strange fate has naturally been a great shock to me.
He gets no real answers from Holmes, and Holmes is clearly still struggling from his illness. It's rare for Sherlock adaptations to show him in this weakened state, but this series goes to great lengths to present him as he is in the novels, occasionally struck down with illness. Although it's always unsettling, even though it never really suggests he won't get better. The next day, the Reverend comes to Holmes in hysterics, as now Mortimer Tregennis has been killed, and seemingly by the same bedevilment that took hold of his siblings. The crime scene is at the vicarage, and it provides Holmes with more clues than the first, and he sets up an experiment at the cottage he and Watson are staying. He took a sample of a mysterious powder from a lamp at the vicarage and has bought an identical lamp. He repeats what he thinks happened by burning the powder with the lamp, and as the powder burns, he is confronted by strange and horrifying images as he hallucinates. Normally, I'm not a big fan of the sort of avant-garde filming techniques they often used for these types of scenes, and I'm not too keen on the mid-80s special effects, but the imagery chosen and Brett's performance really make the scene disturbingly watchable. He is eventually rescued by Watson, who was sitting near the open door so was less affected, and apologises for this stupidly dangerous stunt. When they are both recovered, he summons Dr. Sterndale, telling him to explain why he killed Mortimer Tregennis.
Affects me personally in the most intimate fashion.
The killing of Mortimer Tregennis.
Sherlock knows that he returned from Plymouth because he suspected that Mortimer was behind the attack on the other Tregennises, and claims to have followed Sterndale, which leads to this beautiful exchange.
How do you know that?
I followed you.
I saw no one.
That is what you may expect to see when I follow you.
Sterndale was actually Brenda Tregennis's true love, but they were unable to marry because he was already married, but his wife had left him. Unfortunately, under the laws at the time, he was unable to get a divorce without her consent. That's why he killed Mortimer, with a rare African root, devil's foot root. Mortimer had earlier stolen the powdered root from a supply Sterndale had acquired on his many trips to Africa. This is how he knew Mortimer was the guilty party. Had Sterndale not been telegraphed by the Reverend and got on board ship at Plymouth for another African voyage as he intended, he never would have discovered the truth. Sherlock allows Sterndale to leave for Africa, and Watson again questions Sherlock taking the law into his own hands. Sherlock gives quite possibly the most emotional answer he could give.
I have never loved. But if I did, and if the woman I had loved had met with such an end.
This is an unusually emotional episode, filled with melancholy, from Sherlock's lethargy to Watson's sadness at his friend's addiction, to the deaths of the Tregennises, to the horrific hallucination, to the broken-hearted and vengeful doctor. There isn't much joy to be had. Even so, by the end of the episode, Sherlock reveals an unusually positive outlook, as if the sheer bleakness of everything that has transpired has washed away his own depression. I'm not sure the overall mood of the episode quite translate into an enjoyable viewing experience, but it is definitely an entertaining story, and adds a lot of depth to the character of Holmes. It's definitely more enjoyable on repeat viewings, but it never quite reaches the level of fun that we get in other stories. I also wasn't a big fan of the score for this episode, as it relies heavily on African style music, which felt a bit like a parody, and the disjointed violin doesn't help. Having said that, while the tone is noticeably different to other episodes, it's still a very well made and well performed episode, so it's very difficult to rate it. But I feel it definitely deserves a high 3 or a low 4 out of 5. Thank you. Goodbye.